there is a sense of a possibility of limited solidarity that many of us are familiar with. And typically, when we experience limited solidarity, we don't even call it solidarity. The very word solidarity implies something else. But I'll just give an example, which is, when I came to the United States, I came as a Vietnamese refugee. My parents were Vietnamese refugees. We didn't consider ourselves Asian. My parents called themselves Oriental at the best if they were speaking in English. So to come to Berkeley and encounter Asian American communities in the student population and among the professors was a radicalizing experience for me. Because what that meant was that people who had considered themselves different from each other in some way, let's say Koreans and Chinese and Japanese and Vietnamese and Filipinos, none of us would have called ourselves Asians in Asia, for example. Here in the United States, because of the pressures of anti-Asian racism in its long history, young people came up with this idea of calling ourselves Asian American. Now that is solidarity right there. And at the time that people came up with this term in the late 1960s, it was pretty radical, that idea of an Asian American solidarity. Now I think, and here we see the ways by which solidarity can change meanings over time, that kind of Asian American solidarity can oftentimes be really limited, because a lot of Asian Americans have embraced this kind of solidarity not to advance a sense of justice beyond themselves, but in order to just advance Asian American self-interest, which is why we see a lot of Asian American neoconservatism or Asian American neoliberalism, platforms or positions that can help Asian Americans but not other people. So I go back to that moment of the late 1960s and think that those Asian Americans who called themselves that, they were always a minority, because most people who are Asian did not call themselves Asian American back then. So what I take from that is that this sense of a more expansive and radical solidarity almost always comes from a minority position. It's people who really embrace being minor and embrace being what that means, that being minor is always politicized, that are able to build this sense of radical solidarity with other minority populations that we recognize. And we really need that today, because part of what's happening in the Trump administration is that Trump, through various speeches and positions, is offering a story of a very limited solidarity. That is the limited solidarity of Make America Great Again, which requires not building an expansive solidarity amongst all Americans, but making sure that there is very much an outgroup, a demonized other, who are now, at this moment, immigrants, undocumented migrants, so-called gangsters, and so on, against whom a limited solidarity can be built. And for those of us who believe in a more expansive solidarity that includes more and more people, we really have to be aware of that very dangerous narrative of limited solidarity, and we must oppose it and offer an alternative with a more capacious and expansive and compassionate solidarity.